we'll stand by for a while. I think it's 5 until. And I think we'll start about noon.
Perfect.
Yeah, sometimes our folks coming from clinic, they may be running a little bit behind, so they slide in about 12:01, 12:02.
Oh, that's fine.
Probably don't do that up in St. Louis. You probably start every meeting right on the money.
Right. Yeah, I don't mind even waiting because I think this is usually only takes me about 45 minutes. So there'll be plenty of time for questions and whatever.
We were able to open the slides okay, and they're open.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just share your screen and you move along at your own pace.
Awesome. I can do that. Let's see.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Tilman J. Fertitta Family College of Medicine Grand Rounds. We're honored to have Dr. Angela Sanford join us today. Is age just a number, or is it something to be avoided at all costs? Anti-aging sentiments permeate deeply in our culture. In previous civilizations, aging was an accomplishment, something to be celebrated and revered. The aged were seen as pillars of society and were greatly respected. It appears that view may have changed in our society. Aging may have become something to hide and even avoid for as long as possible. While many major institutions and organizations have developed policies to tackle prejudices such as gender bias and racism, in many ways, the aging bias may still be waiting to be tackled. In this presentation, the subtleties of aging bias and associated negative stigma will be discussed. Dr. Sanford will also put forth ideas on how to promote more positive aging stereotypes. A little bit about Dr. Sanford. She completed her undergraduate studies at St. Louis University, double majoring in biology and psychology. She went to medical school at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and then returned to St. Louis for her residency and fellowship. She completed that residency in internal medicine, and she remained in academic medicine, where she's currently an associate professor of internal medicine in the Division of Geriatric Medicine at St. Louis University and is serving as the interim division director. Dr. Sanford has a robust clinical practice spanning the geriatric continuum of care. She teaches medical students, residents, fellows, faculty in the outpatient clinic, nursing home, retirement community, and on the geriatric inpatient and consult service in the hospital. She also serves as a medical director in a skilled long-term care facility, a retirement community, and a home health agency. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Angela Sanford to our Grand Rounds.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eller. I'm so fortunate that you asked me to speak today. I'm really thankful for this opportunity to present. I've written this lecture about 1,000 times in my head since I started geriatric practice about 12 years ago. And it was really nice to finally be able to put that on paper and to start sharing it. I have no disclosures to disclose today. And I wanted to kind of start with a little dedication. I wanted to dedicate this lecture to my grandparents, who were so influential on my career choice. Only one lived long enough to see me become a geriatrician. And I think all of them really showed me the beauty of aging and helped me develop the profound respect I have for older adults today. So grandma on the left is the one that was able to see me become a geriatrician. So today we'll talk about the concept of ageism and how deeply rooted this bias is in each one of us. We'll compare and contrast the aging experience in the Western culture versus other cultures. I hope that you can gain an awareness on the impact of ageism in the workforce and the healthcare setting. And then we'll brainstorm on ways to change the ageism narrative within ourselves and the surrounding culture. I would be happy if you interrupt me and unmute yourself and participate if anyone sees fit. We can make this more participatory. So I wanted to start out with the question, how many of you have experienced ageism? Does anyone have a brief story to share? I took this picture when I took my daughter on a Girl Scout outing. We went to a restaurant to eat lunch with the Girl Scouts, and I saw this sign that says elderly parking only. And I got out of my car and I took the picture, and I tried to explain to the Girl Scouts that the word elderly is probably not politically correct anymore. And it's kind of, we're using terms as like older adults to be more politically correct, because elderly can sometimes have a derogatory meaning. Anyone have any stories they would like to share on ageism? Okay, we'll start with a quiz. True or false, there is an ICD-10 code for old age. Anyone want to take a guess? So this is true. There's a senility not otherwise specified and an ICD-10 code for old age. And what percentage of older adults do you think live in nursing homes in the US? Do you think it's 10 to 15%, 2 to 4%, 5 to 8%, or maybe 15 to 20%? I think as a nursing home physician, I inflate this in my head. And I think, most older people live in a nursing home. But the answer is actually B. The correct answer is 2 to 4%. About 2% live in assisted living facilities, 2% of older adults, and about 4% live in nursing facilities, which is much less than, I think or would have thought. And then finally, true or false, successful aging is the responsibility of the individual. It's kind of a loaded question. It's kind of a trick question. It could be true or false depending on how you view it, but we do know genetics, environment, and social and societal factors kind of all contribute to successful aging. So is it totally a responsibility of the individual? Perhaps not, but there is a lot that we can do to successfully age. So I wanted to start off with some thoughts. Have you ever thought, oh no, this 90-year-old on my clinic schedule is going to slow me down. All these old people do is complain. Has that thought ever crossed your mind? Or maybe that car in front of me is going so slow, it must be an old man. He shouldn't be driving. Or that elderly checker at Target takes so long to ring up our purchases. Let's go to the 20-year-old and check out lane 3. Or OMG, that old lady really is using a check to pay at Walgreens? Why doesn't she get a debit card? Where are her kids to help her with the technology? Have any of you had these thoughts? Well, after I wrote this lecture, I started kind of introspecting on my own biases, and I realized these were all thoughts that I had. These are all thoughts that I've had recently. The elderly checker at Target, her name is Nancy, and my kids always know every time we have the $400 cart of groceries that we need to avoid checkout lane 3 or go to the younger person. So these are all my thoughts, and I, pride myself on being an advocate for older people and a compassionate advocate for their care, but I have my own aging biases. So my hope with this lecture is that maybe you can introspect some too, and maybe think of what your biases may be. Everything you know about aging is wrong. From a young age, our developing brains are filled with images, stories, and songs that encourage fears of being old. Think about our bedtime stories that we share. The older characters are usually ugly, scary, feeble, and these were, reading to our small children before bed, already putting this image that being old is something to fear. Think about the 100th day of school. All of you that have school-age children know we celebrate the 100th day of school in elementary school. And a lot of times, a lot of schools do this by dressing like humpback 100-year-olds. As you can see in the picture, I think you probably all know what I'm talking about. We see those pictures on Facebook, as the 100th day approaches. Young women are primary targets for anti-aging cosmetics. And the message of it's never too soon to fight the aging process is always around us. I can attest with my 11-year-old daughter that she's already thinking about wrinkles and how that is unattractive. And we're conditioned in society to equate any amount of dependence as failure. Really, dependence is not failure. We should depend on one another, right? And then cultural messages seem to present caregiving as a burden that leads to burnout instead of really a natural or normal part of human relationships. We care for our children when they're little, and it's natural that it's okay to think that maybe they'll care for us when we age, and that it's not a burden. It's part of the natural cycle of relationships. So I wanted to point out that old women are often the face of evil in our fairy tales and folklore. So the one on the left, that's the witch. The far left is the witch in Snow White. So she's an older woman that was going to poison Snow White with an apple. And then the second on the screen is the old lady in Hansel and Gretel. She catches children in the woods and wants to cook them in an oven and eat them. And then there's Cruella de Vil, who is the older lady in 101 Dalmatian, who steals Dalmatian puppies from children. And then on the bottom, we have Ursula from Little Mermaid, who rips out Ariel's voice box so that she herself can have a youthful singing voice. And then finally on the bottom right is this old woman in Rapunzel, or Tangled, Disney's Tangled, who locks Rapunzel up in a tower and uses the power of her hair to stay eternally youthful. So this is just a common representation of the antagonist in our children's fairy tales and movies, that they grow up seeing. So in terms of the epidemiology of ageism, a study from the University of Michigan that included over 2,000 adults used this 10-item everyday ageism scale to assess the exposure to ageism. They found that around 82% of older adults experience ageism every day. 65% reported exposure to ageist messages in ads, greeting cards, commercials, etc. on a daily basis. A pretty high percentage also experienced internalized ageism in that they felt that being sad, worried, or lonely was just a natural part of the aging process. So it's quite prevalent. And when you ask older adults, most of them have stories to tell about how this message is prevalent every day. Ageism studies have been conducted in 45 countries around the world. There was a systematic review that pulled these studies from the 45 countries and aimed to look at the association between ageism and health outcomes. And these associations were found to be actually stronger in less developed countries than more developed countries, which you wouldn't imagine. You would think less developed countries maybe, cared more for their older adults, but really in less developed countries, there's just less resources that are allocated to caring for older adults. The associations between ageism and health were also stronger in those with lower education levels. The number of studies conducted on ageism has steadily increased, and these studies consistently indicate an increasing prevalence of ageism. They're doing more studies as we're gaining awareness that this is a societal problem. I wanted to share this video. So these are my children, and when I was working on this lecture, I was talking to one of my colleagues about, what I was finding out about ageism, and she asked me if my children have ever called me a boomer. She said that the new generation calls older people boomers, and I couldn't recall being called a boomer, but it wasn't much longer after that when I was putting together our new smart TV that's much smarter than I, when my daughter said, "Mom, you're just such a boomer." So I sat them all down and said, "What does that even mean?" So I wanted to play this. I heard my children using the word boomer, and I inquired as to what this may be. All right, Blaze is 12 years old. What is a boomer?
A boomer is someone who doesn't know anything about the new culture, I guess. New culture, yeah.
All right, Cecilia is 11. What is a boomer?
A boomer is a person who's boring.
Sam is 9. What is a boomer?
A boomer is an old person who doesn't really know how to do anything.
Great. And their mom is a geriatrician. So clearly here I failed with my own children, who I brought all of them to the nursing home, but clearly they're still missing the message here. There just seems to be a pervasive message that younger is better, younger is good, and older is bad. But if you really think about it, being young or old are not good or bad, they just are. So every ageism lecture probably needs some definitions of aging. So there's 3 different models to consider. We've got the biological aging model, which represents physiological age, or another word for that is senescence. So in the biological aging model, the whole concept is based on the age of your cells. So it's pretty simplistic. It's a process that that sees aging as leading to gradual deterioration of function of cells and/or organisms. You can even look at it at the cellular level, very basically. Aging is telomere damage, epigenetic dysregulation, DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, and this leads to stem cell exhaustion and chronic inflammation. So the biological aging model reflects how our body and brain show the physical effects of aging, and then just, how old are your cells? It's really a one-sided view based on decline. Then you've got the chronological aging model, which is based on your birthday. So it leaves room for heterogeneity. So as we know in geriatrics, taking care of one 70-year-old is not the same as taking care of another 70-year-old. And then my favorite model of aging is the comprehensive person-centered model, which really looks at aging as a universal, lifelong, biological, psychological, and social and spiritual process of development over time. It's dynamic, includes all processes, growth, loss, maintenance, and adaptation. And I think this is more multidimensional and multi-directional and really is very individualized. I would say the individualized part of aging is one of my favorite parts of my job. I can't really follow algorithms always when making treatment recommendations, and I really have to get to know the person in front of me. I have 65-year-olds who live in the nursing home who have more comorbidities and debility than some of my, 85, 90-year-old clinic patients. So I really think to answer the question on the bottom, is age just a number? I think in geriatrics, age is just a number. And this whole concept always keeps me thinking about the person in front of me. So ageism is a term that was coined by Robert Butler in 1969. It's defined by the World Health Organization as a stereotype, prejudice, and/or discrimination towards others or oneself based on age. So a stereotype is a distorted or simplified belief that attributes characteristics to a member of a specific group. So it lumps, stereotypes lump people together without acknowledging their differences. So an example of an ageist stereotype would be all older people are frail and helpless. A prejudice is a judgment that's formed without sufficient knowledge, thought, or reason, and can result from stereotyping. An example here would be, I can't hire this older candidate because older people aren't good with technology. And then discrimination is an unjustified behavior towards different groups of people based on identity characteristics. An example here would be, old people don't contribute to society and just drain our resources. So ageism can be directed at those who are young or old. I will say that reverse ageism is possible. Probably most of us women have all had older adults say, you're too young to be a doctor, or, you must be a nurse. So it can be definitely directed at those who are young as well. Ageism is often a result of unconscious or unintentionally ingrained thoughts in our thought pattern. Aging bias is a preference for or against a certain age group. Compared to other biases or discriminations, it often goes unchallenged. We think about racism, sexism, we talk about these things more than ageism. There are many biases, and ageism is just one of them, but examples are taller people are better leaders. We shouldn't hire that woman because she may become pregnant. That person in a wheelchair must also have cognitive deficits. And then women are the weaker sex. Obese people are lazy. These are all examples of other biases. And I think we're better at tackling some of these biases than we have been at tackling the aging bias. So part of tackling the aging bias, you'll see, is really coming to appreciate the contributions older people make to society and really viewing them as our equals. So I listed some of the famous octogenarians and nonagenarians. Normally, if I were giving this in person, I would go around the room and have people guess who each one is, but I'll just tell you. So on the very left, it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She died at age 87. Number 2 is Mr. Larry King. He died at age 87 also. And then the third person is Betty White. She died at age 99, and she hosted Saturday Night Live at age 88. And then on the far right there is Warren Buffett. He is 93 and still working. And then on the bottom left is B.B. King. He was still touring at the time of his death at age 89. And then the one next to B.B. King, the guy next to B.B. King, is John Williams. So he's the famous composer that did things like Jurassic Park and Star Wars. He had a career spanning 7 decades and died at age 92 and was still working up until his death. And then Chuck Norris, everyone's favorite. It's really amazing that I didn't realize how old he was. He's 84. And we still see him working. And then Morgan Freeman's on the bottom right, and he is 86. And I believe I just saw a commercial with him in it. So he is still working as well. So why care about ageism? Ageism's bad for overall health and longevity. This was a study that looked at the association between ageism and health outcomes and found that people with positive attitudes on aging lived longer, an average of 7.5 years longer. The stress of ageism seems to cause an increased risk of chronic disease, dementia, physical decline, and depression. And negative self-perceptions of ageism or aging, sorry, can lead to beliefs that it's not important to seek medical care and can lead to poor self-rated health. So I've seen this even in my own clinic population. If I'm just old, there was no reason to come to you, you wouldn't be able to do anything for me. This is often the result of a negative self-perception of ageism. So ageism also contributes to health inequity at both the structural level and the individual level. So at the structural level, it leads to, or it can be caused when societal institutions promote bias against older people through their policies, practices, and procedures, and this can lead to discrimination. So one example is exclusion from research studies. It seems the only research studies that don't exclude older adults are those done in geriatric medicine. One of the studies looked at how many patients are excluded from the Parkinson's disease trials, and they found that 49% of Parkinson's disease clinical trials excluded older adults, even though most of us tend to think of Parkinson's disease as an older adult, Parkinson's disease as something that occurs in older adults, but older adults are largely excluded, especially nursing home patients, from all of the clinical trials, which is an example of the structural level of ageism. And then also another example would be withholding medical treatments and procedures based on age alone. I do think we're getting better at this, and we've looked at this, and I think our culture is changing on this. At the individual level, older people often assimilate negative beliefs about aging from their culture, and this leads to poor quality of life, reduced longevity, and sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's been pretty extensively studied that people who have negative views on aging die earlier, but it's sort of hard to know what came first, the chicken or the egg. Maybe patients or people have negative views on aging because they're chronically ill, or maybe their negativity plays a role in the response to their illness and thus reduction in lifespan. So there's a huge impact of ageism on the health of older adults at both structural and individual levels. This was a systematic review including 422 studies that looked at the association between ageism and 11 different health outcomes. And all of the 11 domains they chose to look at were impacted by ageism. Okay. And then another reason to care about ageism is it's bad for business. So we'll talk more about this. There's a section on ageism in the workplace, and we'll talk more about this, but ageism impacts economic output, consumer spending, and workplace environment and industry. Older people are often kept out of production roles, which limits their ability to make money and contribute to economic growth. So why do beauty companies advertise anti-aging remedies instead of advertising the beauty of aging? So these are just some examples of ads I found. I think the answer is money. But think of the pervasive messages these ads send to our children or our younger generation. My daughter, I mentioned, is 11, and she's trying to wear sunscreen every day to avoid wrinkles. She wants to know about hyaluronic acid and beauty products. And there's this pervasive message even among preteens and teenagers that, we don't want to age at any cost. We don't want to look older than we are, and we don't want to look old. We don't want to get wrinkles. Having wrinkles is not beautiful. And I believe that our media is sending this message to all of us. So how do other cultures view aging? So the ancient Greek and Romans were not very kind to their aging population. They accepted the old as diseased model. So old age was conceptualized as a downward slope of decrepitude and a loss of the highly prized youth and vigor. Aristotle thought aging was due to the loss of innate heat. This heat he thought was vital for the function of the soul and body, and the flame diminishes with age. When this flame is extinguished, one dies. Galen, who was a Roman physician, had similar views in that he believed aging was a gradual loss of function and vitality through the extinction of the body's vital heat and humors, and the body is marked by increased desiccation, so drying out. And the picture on the bottom left on that Greek vase is a picture of Jairus, who's the Greek god of old age. Jairus is the Greek basis for the word geriatrics. He was a lesser god who was granted immortality but was not ageless. So he aged, and as he aged, he became tinier and more shriveled. As he withered away but didn't die, his lover, who was a higher Greek god, decided that he was disgusting in appearance and actually turned him into a cicada. because he just wouldn't die. So she got tired of looking at his old withered body and made him into a cicada. And he never did die. So many ancient cultures viewed the older adults for their experience, knowledge, and survival skills, unlike the Greek and Romans. Think about in caveman times, older adults were viewed as being wise. They knew the water sources, they knew which plants were poisonous, they really knew this, how to survive. And older maybe in caveman times was 35, who knows? But in biblical times, the long-lived people were regarded as favored by God to fulfill a divine purpose. So Leviticus says, stand up in the presence of the ages, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. And several of the key characters in the Bible were very old. So Abraham was 175 years old when he died. Adam was 930 years old, and Noah was 950 years old. So those pictures on the very left bottom, that's Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and then Adam and Eve, and then Noah in his ark. So Islam also had favorable, or has and had favorable views of aging. In their religion, honoring elders is part of Allah's glorification. So Muhammad said, whenever one is in the presence of a senile in the tribe, respect him. To have people of old age will increase the mercy and the beneficence of God on him or her, and will expand one's blessings unto him and her. And the Quran said, treat parents with benevolence. If either or both of them attain old age in your presence, then do not say even to them, nor reproach them. Always speak to them submissively. Eastern cultures traditionally view older adults as wise, valuable members of family and society. Elders remain the head of the family and are cared for by the extended family within the home. There's often shrines or altars created in the home where photos or mementos are placed of elderly relatives to promote honor. Aging is considered a natural process that should not be resisted. In Confucianism, there is a positive view of aging as well. Older adults are to be treated with respect and obedience. Taoism, there's a belief that nothing in the universe, including us, will ever stay the same, and that we must allow our life force energy to flow and transform as it may. And then in Buddhism, there's a belief that fragile bodies and minds are sacred and worthy of the greatest kindness and care. So that brings us to our culture. What happened to us? Western cultures have traditionally been thought of as ageist, undervaluing the older adult and older adult population. Our culture tends to be more youth-centered, placing value on younger adults rather than older adults. These beliefs are driven by Protestant values that tie individual worth with ability to work and be an active member of society. So think about in the agricultural days, who was revered in those days? It was the wealthy owners, and the landowners tended to be older men. And then when the printing press was developed, this definitely changed sort of the viewpoint on older adults. So previously to the printing press, older adults were seen as living encyclopedias, sources of knowledge. Once the printing press was developed, there was a way to widely distribute written material very quickly. And older adults kind of lost their position in society as a living encyclopedia, so they were no longer needed. And then when the Industrial Revolution happened, the factories dominated, older adults were seen as not being able to keep up with or adapt the new technology, and younger workers really took over the economic scene. Also, older adults tended to remain on their farms and out of the cities on their land, and then had no one to take care of them, right, as the younger people were flocking to the cities to work in factories. So this totally changed the dynamics. And aging became kind of viewed as a deterioration or a weakness or a disadvantage when people could, the older adults weren't as adept at working in factories and keeping up with the newer technology, or that was the viewpoint. And caregiving was viewed as a burden because people couldn't leave the factories to go back to the farms and care for their older adults there. So that's really when the nursing home was invented, or I think they called them like warehouses or shelters at that point. So this is a picture of Martin Luther nailing his 95-item thesis on the church door. So we can blame him for these Protestant values that tie individual worth with ability to work. This is a study that looked at cultural perspectives on aging. They looked at 8 domains, so it included over 3,000 college students in 26 countries. And they looked at 8 domains, which the participants rated the perceptions of changes in each of these domains. So the domains actually were ability to do everyday tasks, ability to learn new info, general knowledge, wisdom, respect received from others, and authority in the family, also life satisfaction. So what the study found is that there was widespread cross-cultural consensus regarding the direction of the aging trajectory. So for example, there was a pretty big consensus that attractiveness, ability to do everyday tasks, ability to learn new things, and life satisfaction decreased with age, whereas knowledge, wisdom, respect, family authority increased with age. They found when they looked at each culture individually that Asian cultures had an overall more positive view on aging in general than their Western counterparts, which fits with what we know. So I want to challenge you a little bit and think about aging as a social construct. So social constructs are concepts that are not objective realities, but exist because humans have agreed upon them. So social constructs are created to help us make sense of the world and determine how we view others and their behaviors. So for example, think about money. Money really is just a piece of paper, right? And it's been assigned a value. It only is worth something to us because we as a society have agreed upon its worth. And countries are really just parcels of land that have been designated as having borders belonging to a group of people. But if you think about them for what they are, there's usually no fence that really separates, Canada from the US. It's just because we've agreed upon that this is the border and this is a different country if I step, 5 feet this way. And age. So the definition of old and young has changed over time. So think about caveman times. Again, old may have been 35. And in the Industrial Revolution, old may have been 50 versus now old is 85 or whatever, we agree upon. And then also age changes across cultures, the definition of old and young. So old in sub-Saharan Africa is not going to be the same as old in Sardinia, where, some of the oldest population lives right now. So age is really what we define it to be as a social construct and what we've agreed upon as a society. So what are some positive aspects in the aging process? This is from another study done by the University of Michigan, a poll on aging. So over 88% of older adults feel more comfortable being themselves as they've aged. We know there's often improved social and emotional intelligence with age. There's usually a greater acceptance of self and others. There tends to be less emotional volatility and a better understanding of relationships. And older adults tend to have, a more comprehensive collection of lived experiences, or what we consider wisdom. There tends to be more gratitude and resiliency in the older population. And those that hold positive perspectives on aging report less ageism and overall better in physical and mental health. So ageism in the media. This is really a loaded thing right now, right? You can go to any news website at any moment and pull up discussions on ageism. So my favorite, I tried to be nonpartisan here and include from all news websites. So CNN says, what is the typical degree of cognitive ability for a person in their 80s? I mean, that's kind of crazy. That's pretty stereotypical and lumping together a whole group of people, right? In questioning cognitive ability. I like this MSNBC headline. MSNBC host defends Biden, accuses special counsel of sneaking ageism into a report. He rides a bike. You could go on and on. There's so many, I couldn't even fit them all on the same page. Here's some more. Mitt Romney has an urgent message for McConnell and Biden and Trump. Our leaders want everyone to just accept their age, but they cannot admit they are simply old. And then I like the elderly serial slingshot shooter nabbed after terrorizing neighbors for a decade. Special counsel calls Biden sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with poor memory, brings no charges. So this is what we're battling with the media. And then when you want a solid example of ageism, you have to do no more than walk down the greeting card aisle. I'll let you take a look. And does anyone remember those billboards, the help, I've fallen and I can't get up? I definitely know they were along the highway when I was younger, driving along, you would see those billboards. But none of these really portray aging in a positive light, right? So we're going to talk a little about ageism in the workplace, and then we'll talk about ageism in healthcare. So in 2018, adults over 50 years of age contributed 40% of the US gross domestic product. This was actually a study done by the AARP. However, in 2018, the economy missed out on an additional $850 billion to the US GDP due to involuntary retirement, unemployment, and underemployment of older adults. So as you can see on the top graph, the older adult labor force has grown substantially since 1998 in all age groups, so about 80%. And then in the bottom, over 40% of workers 65 plus intend to continue working into their 70s. A study of older nurses showed that those who perceived ageist practices at work were less likely to identify with the organization's culture and more likely to seek early retirement. About 10% of retired men and about 7.5% of retired women report that they've retired because of age discrimination. Aging bias in the workforce is much easier, I think, than other biases to mask. It's harder to get away with, racism and sexism in the workplace, but we tend to be more accepting of ageism. There's an assumption that only younger people are adept with changing technologies. And also hiring efforts tend to be focused on younger, what's called more fit employees. And we just sort of accept that older people are supposed to retire and we're supposed to, let the younger workforce take their jobs. Also, this is just to highlight that ageism in the workplace disproportionately affects lower socioeconomic classes and minority workers. So what are some advantages of hiring older workers? Many older workers have a strong work ethic. They're loyal, they're punctual, they're professional, they have strong communication skills and enhanced problem-solving skills, and their vast experiences or wisdom lead them to being able to be very successful in the workplace when new challenges arise. So switching gears to ageism in healthcare. In the 1900s, the biomedical model of aging was created and taught in medical schools. So this model is that health is the absence of disease and disability, and focus should be on curative solutions. So basically, aging is a pathological state that must be treated. The biomedical model of aging describes disability as a pathology, impairment, or a dysfunction, and aging something to be diagnosed, treated, and cured. This sort of established this bias that aging is a pathological state, and we still really teach this model to this day. There's a high prevalence of ageism amongst healthcare professionals. There's an overall negative attitude often towards older patients. Many desire to focus on curative medicine and avoid the complexities of evaluating, diagnosing, and managing multiple comorbidities, which we often see in older adults. Many healthcare professionals believe that pain and suffering are just expected parts of older age. And there's a systemic focus on provider efficiency, productivity, and reimbursement. And we all know it does at times take longer to see some of, our older adults. And for me, for clinic, I know I get 30 minutes for those visits for follow-ups and 60 minutes for, new patients. And I'm fortunate that most of the time my healthcare system that I work for, they haven't really given us trouble about those longer visits. But I know in a lot of practices, their providers are not afforded extra time, and therefore it makes it very challenging to care for the older adult, and it makes it, a negative experience often for the patient and the provider. There's an evidence of some slow cultural changes, I think, in healthcare. I alluded to earlier that, previously we avoided offering certain treatments and procedures to patients because of age alone, but we're seeing, especially in the oncology world, that age alone is maybe not the best predictor of health outcomes, and that you really have to look at the bigger picture and other factors such as functional status and even goals of care. So I think we're changing slowly. And really coming to realize that age alone is not a good indicator of health status or ability to recover from procedures and treatments. This was a study that explored the attitudes of physicians in training, so residents and medical students toward older patients. This included interviews with 21 medical students and residents working at a teaching hospital in California. And I just wanted to read a couple of the quotes from the paper from the trainees. One said, it's always a bigger save when you help a 35-year-old woman with 2 kids than it is to bring an altered 89-year-old with a UTI back to her semi-altered state. So from that regard, it's a little bit less rewarding. Later in the interview, he states, it's hard to admit somebody fixed one of their 22 problems, probably their least significant problem, and send them back. That's not rewarding. Maybe you rehydrate someone who's dehydrated, or you give them anti-nausea medications since they're vomiting. You've made them feel better in the moment, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't feel like you've done much. So it's frustrating for me. This student said, eventually you have to disengage and just leave the room, even if they have 5 other complaints they wanted to talk to you about, like the food wasn't good, the nurse kept waking them up in the middle of the night to take their blood pressure, and they didn't like that. And they think that their home medication is a little different from this, that, this is a blue pill and it's a little bigger and they're not this shape. And the intern says, I'd like to be able to talk to people all day, but when you have 7 other people to see, you don't care if the little blue pill is this big or shaped like this or what. And then a 4th-year student voiced similar frustrations by stating, doctors assume that when an old person comes in, there's going to be a ton of problems and it's going to be a pain to address all those issues. Responding to a question about whether she received negative messages from her colleagues about nursing home patients, she said, our gut reaction is when you hear that a patient from a nursing home, when you hear that a patient is from a nursing home, you cringe a little. It's not that you're speaking negatively about them. It's just that you know that generally they have a lot of medical problems, and that's why they're in a nursing home. So while I can't guarantee that it doesn't affect their care, I'm hoping it doesn't. I'd like to think we give good care to everyone. So not a very positive view of aging by trainees at this teaching hospital. So this is probably the saddest part of my lecture, for me at least, the decline of geriatrics as a specialty. The number of board certified geriatricians in 2000 was about 10,000, and this has dropped to about 7,000 in 2022. In 2022, only 43% of geriatric fellowship spots were filled, which is the lowest of all 71 fellowship specialties, right? You don't see cardiology with open spots or GI, but geriatrics, only 43% of spots were filled. One reason for this is that when you ask residents why they don't go into it, it's the salary. So the AAMC data showed that the geriatrician's salary is 9% lower than general internist and 14% lower than hospitalist, despite our fellowship training. So you have to wonder, I wanted to point out first, though, on the bottom. So just look at that picture. So there's 102,000 pediatricians. There's about 52,000 OB/GYN physicians, 36,000 cardiologists, and compare that with geriatric medicine, there's only 7,000 of us. I know when I was trying to decide, I always knew I wanted to do geriatrics, but I really couldn't decide if I was going to do family practice or internal medicine. But I remember I met my husband in med school, and I remember as med students, we were having this conversation about what to do, how should I become a geriatrician? And he was going to be a surgeon, so he was trying to decide what specialty. And I remember him saying to me about vascular surgery, oh, I don't want to do vascular surgery. That's a dying breed. They're coming out with all these endovascular procedures that radiology is going to be able to do, and there won't be any need for vascular surgeons. Well, there's probably more vascular surgeons than geriatricians, and I can tell you vascular surgery is probably growing, whereas we are declining. So I would have never guessed when I was sitting in that spot like 15 years ago trying to decide how to get to be a geriatrician, that my specialty would be on the decline. It's very sad to me. And I have to wonder, is it secondary to ageism? I hypothesize that societal attitudes regarding aging have contributed to the fall of geriatrics as a specialty. When you look at the literature, the most commonly cited reason that trainees aren't interested in geriatrics is that they prefer to work with patients who can be cured. So there's this belief that older people just can't be cured, so why bother? And I don't know how that has permeated our medical culture. I will say I do geriatric consults about 1 week a month, and we have the internal medicine residents that rotate on the service, and they do a week on the service at a time. And I feel like I have the highest resident call-in rate of any service. I wasn't able to say this when I gave this for grand rounds at my own institution, but a couple of weeks ago, one of the residents called in and said, I can't come to consults today. My cat is getting an echo. And it really upset me at first, because I was like, this guy would never call into the MICU or cardiology. Imagine I'm telling the cardiology division director, I can't come, my cat's getting an echo. Or MICU, I can't take care of the vented patients today because, you know, my cat is getting an echo, and to call in for the whole day. And this is just an example. This happens almost every week. A resident is calling in because I think it's not viewed as an important service. You know, it's just a bunch of old people that are falling and, you know, having car accidents. We have a lot of trauma consults, falling out of their wheelchairs at the nursing home. Someone else can take care of them. It'll be fine. I can, you know, that's the day I'll schedule my appointment. That's the day I'll schedule my oil change. So I feel like I have the highest call-in rate of any service. There just seems to be competing priorities. I find it challenging to work in the hospital because I look at it, you know, we need to really build an aging-friendly healthcare system, especially for our hospitalized older adults. And when I approach really the administration about some of these things, they just look at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about. I had a meeting once about, I was very upset because I noticed that patients weren't getting fed. I mean, this is something that happens all the time in the hospital, right? Your older patients, especially from nursing homes, can't advocate for themselves. They could never work the TV remote control to order their meal or the phone, you know, and they end up getting food that they don't want or not getting food at all. And then no one sets up their tray. And we come in for rounds, you know, at 10 a.m. and the breakfast has been sitting there unopened since 8 a.m. because this person can't do it. So I decided I was going to go on a campaign and figure out ways we could put policies or procedures in place to really help these people with meal prep and meal ordering and, you know, getting fed. And I stormed into our CEO's office, our CMO's office, and he really just looked at me like I had four heads and was like, I know he wanted to say to me, I have, you know, 20 other fires to put out today, and this is just not, people are getting fed. Because he was like, Angela, do you really believe people aren't getting fed? And I said, yes, I really believe it. And he, you know, nothing came out of it. He let me rant about it, but I find it's challenging because my priorities just don't seem to align with others, you know, in administration. My thing, what I am asking for seems so simple, but everyone else is putting out the bigger fires. So I understand why it would be frustrating to be a geriatrician when, you know, it's very difficult to have an aging-friendly healthcare system. Also, kind of another anecdotal thing is I can't seem to establish a geriatric floor in the hospital. We've been trying for a long time, but we always end up getting told, you know, there's patients that need to be admitted from the ER. We also can't seem to hire a nurse manager that wants to just do geriatrics. It's pretty frustrating. So geriatrician and author Luis Aronson writes, when I tell someone what I do for a living, they usually have one of two reactions. Either their face contorts as if they've smelled something foul, or they offer compliments about my selfless dedication. These apparently opposite responses are actually the same. Both imply that I'm doing something no one else in their right mind would ever do. I felt that way. I feel that way often, but one time I was in the doctor's lounge we have a community hospital that I was working at, and I was in the doctor's lounge, and this surgeon came up to me and introduced himself and said, I'm a general surgeon here. What do you do? And I said, oh, well, I work mostly in the nursing home. And he immediately said, oh, I thought only people who couldn't get jobs, you know, and couldn't get board certified worked in nursing homes. I was so shocked. I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. And then he proceeded to give me his card. And he said, if any of your nursing home patients ever need an operation, just call me. I'll take care of them. I could not get to the trash can fast enough to rip up that card, I can tell you. But there just seems to be a stigma against, you know, geriatricians and geriatrics. So how do we change the narrative? There's no easy way, as these are often deeply rooted in normalized beliefs. We have to identify our biases before they can be overcome. I think we have to view others through the eyes of equity, aim to treat everyone the same and respect for all, and really consider the contributions that one made across a lifespan to their work, family, and community. I often do this in the nursing home because the patient in front of me often can't tell me, you know, what they did for their life's work or how many children they raised, but I just imagine how beautiful their life probably was and what, you know, a contributing member to society that they were, and now, you know, they're unable to contribute in the same ways, but they're still equally as important. And, you know, they made their contributions in their lifetime. I think we have to train the interdisciplinary healthcare team on how to identify ageism also, and then promote teams encompassing age diversity in healthcare of the workplace setting. So it's well known that people that work on teams that have older adults and younger adults tend to see the value of each other, and they can grow and learn together. Biases tend to be challenged when people connect with each other on an authentic level and develop genuine relationships. So that's how, if we promote teams of different ages, we can overcome some of our biases. We have to learn to embrace the heterogeneous nature and complexity of aging and see the beauty in this natural process. And see really our profession as one of service. We serve all. We have to focus efforts on developing aging-friendly healthcare systems so that the older adult receives the best comprehensive care possible with reduction of harm and promotion of satisfaction in the care that they're receiving. And then change, this is the hard one, changing the media's representation of older adults in the aging process. So this was a meta-analysis that included 63 studies with over 6,000 participants that looked at evidence-based strategies to reduce ageism. And what they found is that interventions focusing on education and intergenerational contact showed the largest effects on participant attitudes regarding aging. And then the effects tended to be stronger for females in adolescent or younger age groups, which is really important. So it is possible to age successfully. I wanted to sort of end the lecture with a few patients of my that are in my practice who I find to be really resilient and who have aged successfully. I reached out to each one of them and asked if I could include their stories and pictures in this lecture, and they were all happy to be part of it. So this is Dr. Sandy Johnson and Mr. Bob Johnson. So Dr. Sandy Johnson's a professor emeritus of law and healthcare ethics at St. Louis University, where I work. She's authored several health law textbooks and is still active in the law school. She's 72. And her husband, Mr. Bob Johnson, was a lawyer and had a full career despite having a lot of health challenges. He has multiple sclerosis and Crohn's disease, but he just kept on working every day and contributing to society despite his health challenges. These are the Lowensteins, Dr. Paul Lowenstein and Miss Janice Lowenstein. So Dr. Lowenstein is 75 years old. He worked in the Department of Molecular Biology and Virology, and he still is active on the Radiation Safety Committee. So he still comes to work one day a month and does this committee. Jan, his wife, is 80 years old. She was a MICU nurse, and they've traveled the world together. He wanted me to highlight that the challenges of travel becomes harder when mobility becomes an issue, but where there's a will, there's a way. He wanted me to include pictures of their trip to India, and they also went to Kenya, and where Jan was in her wheelchair, but they were able to participate. Traveling was always important to her, and now that she's having trouble with mobility, he's doing his best to help her still live her best life. And then finally, Dr. Karen Barney and Mr. Steve Barney. Dr. Karen Barney is the chair of SLU's OT department, was the chair of the OT department, and Mr. Barney was a healthcare executive at the corporate level. She just completed editing her 3rd edition of OT with Aging Adults textbook, and I had the pleasure of writing a chapter in it. She actually wanted me to share that one of her most rewarding endeavors has occurred in retirement. She started a prison decarceration program, which she developed to help long-term prisoners who are completing their sentences and needing to reintegrate into society have the skills to do so successfully. And she was okay with me sharing that one of her children is incarcerated and has been for a long time. So this is a passion of hers. And she just wanted me to tell this because she said, even in retirement, we can really contribute and make a difference. So to become anti-ageist, begin with the concept that aging itself is not the problem, and old people are not a burden, and see instead the vibrancy and richness in the aging experience. And so my take-home points today are that age is a construct created and agreed upon by society and cultures. Cultures view aging very differently, and the Western culture tends to have a less positive perspective. Aging is highly prevalent in the media, workplace, and healthcare settings. And the key to changing the narrative is identifying biases on an individual and structural level and working to change the future. I think to become better humans, we must reflect on our own biases. And just one final reminder that aging is not something that just happens to older people. You are aging. Thank you. This is a picture of my mom with my children. We hiked in Sedona, and my mom was able to keep up better than my children, actually. So I'm so thankful you all listened today. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you for joining us, Dr. Sanford. It's very encompassing, so much to think about. Really appreciate your up-to-date references that we can all look to, and also the telling us about your patients. just struck by the level of service and dedication that you demonstrate. I think we have time for one more question. Wendy,
This is a personal question, but I'm curious what you told your kids after you asked them to tell you about what a boomer is.
I'm sure I said something like, what in the world? You guys have all been to the nursing home with me. You know how I feel about older people. Older people are not boring. They're not, I don't know what the one said boring. And I think we just had a conversation about it. I was horrified.
Yeah, I think I have one online question. In surgery, the concept of frailty has been introduced. You can be young and frail or old and not frail. Increased frailty is in some studies increases surgical risk, while age alone does not when one controls for frailty. Are there
Correct.
geriatric studies looking for a similar concept? Do patients go to nursing homes when they become frail or when they become old? It seems the celebrities you showed early in the talk never became frail. How does one avoid becoming frail?
So there's a lot of factors that go into frailty. Really, it's going to be functional status. So is the biggest one. Obviously, staying mentally healthy and cognitively strong, and also exercising. Exercise is like the answer to every geriatric question. How to prevent everything is exercise. How to prevent dementia, how to prevent frailty, how to prevent nursing home admission. Exercise, exercise, exercise. So you get into the nursing home when you can't think clearly. So when you're cognitively impaired or when your mobility is impaired. And exercise definitely can help the mobility piece.
Any more questions for Dr. Sanford? Still have a few minutes.
Thank you all.
I'm sorry, I was trying to get off of mute and get on. So as you can tell, I may be an older person on the faculty here, and I just thank you so much for your comments today. But I was also thinking about sort of the structural ageism in medicine and stuff too, where like I will admit I am over age 65, but during the pandemic, it was if you're over age 65, you got to be vaccinated. There's, and there's just so many of the guidelines that we follow that are or ageism that we put into it. And I'm just wondering if you've had any discussions with folks about, is it really, do I really need a different COVID vaccine because I'm over age 65? I think I'm pretty, healthy and active and all the rest. And so it is just a number for me. So
I would say that the people that even older people, that didn't do well with COVID, it's still functional status and frailty were at play. There was plenty of 90-year-olds who were very healthy and active that sailed through COVID. So I think the big thing is not the number with everything else too. Yeah.
Dr. Schiffman, do you have a question? I think Dr. Tappan had a comment. Dr. Tappan says, I think the key to geriatrics is gerioscience instead of fighting the face of aging and embracing it.
I think I do have a comment.
Sure.
The comment is this. So you do take care of, it is true, and this isn't related to ageism. It is true that when one ages and one gets multiple comorbidities related to aging, that aging individual takes more of your time in regards to handling that patient. And so if the medical administrators recognize that, if there was a score, maybe not frailty score, but some score, that allows the individuals. So, for example, I'm in a difficult specialty, neuro-ophthalmology. We tend to take care of patients that are elderly and take a long time to really get a good history, and the history is really everything. And so, you know, how unfortunately a geriatrician and neuro-ophthalmologist, we all have to stay in business in order to be able to continue doing the good that we do. So it would be great, because it is true that if I take care of a 35-year-old that in general is not likely to be frail, in general is not likely to have chronic illnesses, not that they don't, but they may, and they may be more difficult than the 90-year-old. But there should be some sort of factor for patients, a patient factor, in my opinion, that allows the individuals taking care of patients with chronic illnesses to have the time that they need to do a good job with them.
Like a
And
complexity score.
a complexity score, right, exactly, because unfortunately, it is true that most of our thought processes about an older person, even though we all have ageism, even you do in our thoughts, right? It is because it is true. And so I think the key thing here is really getting a complexity score, as you state, for patients. And maybe instead of like you have hospitalists in the hospital, you have complexity related internists, geriatricians, neuro-ophthalmologists that get the extra time and continue their good work, as opposed to go to the 100 patients a day that the retina doctors are doing, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And they can do fairly good work, because it's sort of like you're just putting a shot in the eye, but you're not really listening to the patient. So
Right.
there's got to be something, because it's crazy that there's only 7,000 geriatricians,
I know.
and it's going to go down. Anyways, just a comment. I don't have an answer, but I do think there needs to be another score.
Definitely. Thank you.
Any more questions for Dr. Sanford today?
I do have one, since we're taking this time, and I really do appreciate it. And sometimes we find that what we're able to emphasize in medical education is related to what's going to be on the student examinations at various levels. I'm just wondering if you know, or who might know, how many questions in BME is creating that are related to geriatric medicine.
I don't know the answer to that. I know in terms of like residency education, internal medicine has taken out their geriatric requirements. There used to be required, you know, exposure to geriatrics. Now there's not. It's gone back and forth throughout the years, but family practice still requires geriatric exposure, specifically nursing home exposure. But I'm not sure about the med students.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, staying with us to answer these questions. Really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again sometime.
Take care. Thank you so much for inviting me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.